If you're listening to this, you may drift off before the end. So before you do, make sure to subscribe and turn on notifications. Before we start, drop a comment with where you're listening from and what time it is. Now, close your eyes. Just relax, take a deep breath and let everything go. Good night. Now we can begin. It began with a sketch. Simple, uneven lines on a scrap of paper, drawn in thick crayon strokes. A house with 4 windows, a crooked chimney, and an overgrown yard. It looked like any child's drawing, except for one detail. The house didn't exist. Not in the neighborhood, not in any storybook, and certainly not in the mind of the narrator. Yet the little girl who made it, small, quiet, always clutching her art pad, insisted she had seen it before. "I draw what I see," she said softly, eyes wide, not in fear, but in something that felt older, something that understood more than she should. The narrator, a part-time art teacher named Callan, had taken the tutoring job on a whim. It was supposed to be easy, 1 child, 2 afternoons a week, mostly drawing exercises. But from the beginning, there was something uncanny about Mira. She never asked questions, never talked about her day or her parents. Every picture she made looked remembered. Even the scribbles felt purposeful, as if they were maps or warnings or dreams that didn't want to stay dreams. That day, when she handed him the house sketch, she said it would be important soon. He smiled, thinking it was a game. It wasn't. That night, Callan took a different road home. His usual route was closed due to construction, so he followed the GPS into a neighborhood he didn't recognize. A sharp right, then a long stretch beneath the flickering yellow glow of old street lamps. That's when he saw it, tucked between 2 rusting mailboxes, behind a line of swaying birch trees. The house from the sketch, same windows, same crooked chimney. He pulled over without thinking, heart thudding slow and loud in his chest. The yard was wild, untamed. Vines climbed up the porch railing, and the wooden steps sagged as if tired from holding weight too long. He didn't go up to the door. Something in the air warned him not to. The silence around the house was dense, like sound couldn't pass through. The longer he stared, the more he felt like the house was aware of him, not watching, just expecting. As if it had been waiting for someone who recognized it. Callan drove away quickly, but not before glancing at the rear-view mirror. Mira's sketch lay on the passenger seat, exactly where he left it. Only now, there were new lines added. The sky was darker. A figure had been drawn in one of the windows. It hadn't been there before. Back in his apartment, Callan tried to sleep, but something had shifted. It wasn't fear. It was curiosity, the kind that gnaws at you in quiet moments. At 3 o'clock, he sat up, pulled the sketch from his bag, and studied it again. The figure in the window was clearer now, taller, head turned toward the street. He didn't remember her drawing it. But Mira's words returned, floating gently in the silence. "I draw what I see." The next time Callan arrived for Mira's session, she was already seated at the table, her sketchpad open, crayons arranged in a perfect line by color. She greeted him with a glance, then immediately turned her attention back to her drawing. No words, no smile, just the soft, rhythmic scratch of wax on paper. Callan hesitated at the doorway, watching her in silence. Something about the way her hand moved. It was fluid, intentional, almost practiced. Not like a child experimenting with color or form, but like someone copying a memory line by line, stroke by stroke. He stepped closer and saw what she was drawing. A park bench beneath a sprawling tree, the sky above heavy with gray. Rain falling, pooling around a figure sitting alone. The figure had no face, just a shadow where the features should be. "Who is that?" he asked gently. Mira paused, then answered without looking up. "You," she said. "You'll be there when it happens." Her tone was calm, not dramatic or fearful, just factual, like she was describing the weather, which, Callan remembered, had been predicted to be clear all week. He didn't question it, not then. He had learned quickly that Mira's drawings were not predictions. They were inevitabilities. He carried the sketch with him that evening, tucked carefully between 2 books in his bag. As night fell, the sky turned a deep, brassy gray. Unseasonal clouds drifted in from the east, and by the time he reached the edge of town, soft rain had begun to fall, light at first, then steady, insistent. Something pulled at him, nudging him toward the park near the old train tracks. He wasn't sure why he turned in, or why he parked without hesitation. The bench from Mira's drawing stood under a massive oak, leaves trembling with droplets. The rain fell in thick sheets now, muffling every sound except the occasional distant rattle of a train. He stood by the bench, unsure whether to sit, unsure why he felt like this moment had already happened. And then he saw it, a small figure standing on the path across from him, just barely visible through the curtain of rain. Mira, no, it wasn't her. The figure was taller, thin, featureless even in proximity. As soon as he blinked, it was gone. Just a shimmer in the mist. Drenched, Callan rushed back to his car, heart rattling in his chest, breath fogging the windshield. He sat there for minutes before pulling the sketch out again. It hadn't changed. The rain, the bench, the faceless figure. He had expected it to shift, to update the way the house drawing had, but it stayed exactly the same. Only now, he noticed something written in pencil in the corner of the page, words that hadn't been there before. You always return to the place where you saw it first. That night, his sleep was broken by dreams of rain, soaked streets, and silent figures standing at windows. The kind of dreams that feel too heavy to forget. When he woke at 3 o'clock, Mira's crayon drawing was lying on his bedside table. He hadn't taken it out of his bag. The following morning, Callan felt an unfamiliar pull, a compulsion he couldn't quite trace, to visit the old district at the edge of town. The neighborhood had long been in decline. Shuttered storefronts, rusted fences, sidewalks cracked and lifted by gnarled roots. It wasn't a place he frequented, and yet, as he walked its narrow lanes, he was gripped by an overwhelming sense of déjà vu. The streets felt eerily familiar. He turned a corner and froze. There, at the very end of the block, was the house from Mira's first drawing. Not similar, the same, the windows, the chipped blue paint, the leaning mailbox. Even the overgrown rose bushes gasping for sun, every detail was exactly as she had drawn it. Callan's breath caught in his throat. He approached slowly, drawn by something more than curiosity. As he reached the porch, a memory surfaced, not with a jolt, but like a soft ripple in still water. He had been here before. Not recently, not in adulthood, but as a child. The front door had creaked the same way under his hand. The smell of musty curtains and something floral beyond the threshold. It hadn't just been a house from Mira's sketchpad. It was a place buried deep in his own forgotten past. He stepped inside, not sure how the door had opened. Dust lay thick across the floor, disturbed only by a trail of small, muddy footprints, child-sized, leading toward the staircase. Something about them chilled him, not because they were recent, but because they mirrored his own steps from long ago. He followed them up the creaking stairs, into a hallway that bent slightly to the left, the wallpaper peeling in long, curling strips. Halfway down, a door stood ajar. Inside, a child's bedroom sat in timeless decay. A broken mobile swayed gently from the ceiling, though there was no breeze. Crayon drawings were still tacked to the wall, yellowed with age. Callan crossed the room and knelt before the desk. On it, a sketchpad identical to Mira's. He opened it. The drawings were crude, clearly done by a child, but one stood out. A faceless man standing in the rain, the bench, the tree, the same scene Mira had drawn days before. In the corner, in shaky handwriting, "I don't want to forget." The realization hit him like a slow, rising tide. This wasn't just any memory, it was his. He had drawn that picture as a child, but how had he forgotten it for so long? Why was Mira repeating it? He left the house shaken, the sketchpad clutched in his hands. As he stepped back into the daylight, he noticed something unusual about the sky. It was midday, but the sun looked dimmer, as if shrouded by something unseen. Shadows stretched slightly too long, and the air had a static buzz, like the world had paused mid-thought. He glanced over his shoulder at the house one last time. In one of the upstairs windows, a figure was watching. Still, silent, exactly where his childhood bedroom would be. But this figure was small, not threatening. Just waiting. That evening, he returned to his apartment, locked the doors, and opened Mira's newest sketch. She had handed it to him without a word, just a lingering look he couldn't decipher. The drawing was of him, again. This time, standing at the foot of the same staircase from the abandoned house, with shadows rising behind him. Written along the bottom in looping childlike script were the words, "The house doesn't forget." Mira didn't speak the next morning. She sat at the kitchen table with her pencil already in motion, her cereal untouched and going soggy beside her elbow. Callan watched her from the doorway, the air in the apartment unusually cold for spring. A faint mist curled at the windows, even though the sun should have burned through the haze hours ago. He didn't interrupt her. He never did when she drew. Her face was tranquil but distant, as if she weren't truly present, as though something else was moving through her small hands. When she finally finished, she slid the paper toward him and hopped off the chair wordlessly. The sketch chilled him more than any nightmare could have. It was a hallway long, impossibly long, its walls lined with framed pictures. At the far end, barely visible, was a door. It was cracked open, light spilling through in narrow, unnatural rays. Along the floor, the shadows of people extended, some with arms outstretched, others standing stiffly in place. One figure was unmistakably him. The detail was uncanny. His stance, his expression, even the tear in his coat sleeve. He had never posed for her like this, and yet there he was, as if she had been watching him in a moment he hadn't yet lived. Callan examined every corner of the drawing, his fingers trembling. The hallway didn't belong to their apartment. He'd never been in a place like it. But when he touched the edge of the page, he felt something strange, like the cold breath of a place he had forgotten. He tried asking her where she had seen it, but she only tilted her head and said quietly, "I don't see it. I just remember it." Then she turned and walked away, as if that answer were complete. That evening, curiosity overtook caution. He drove aimlessly, letting intuition guide him, Mira's drawing on the passenger seat like a map to somewhere unspoken. He didn't recognize the streets, but he knew when to turn. At a long, descending road lined with trees, he stopped the car. There was no sign, no name, just a narrow gate and a path beyond it that disappeared into overgrown hedges. He got out, and the world seemed to mute around him. No birds, no breeze, only the crunch of gravel underfoot and the distant sound of water dripping. He stepped through the gate. The hallway from Mira's drawing wasn't there, not physically, but the feeling was. The way the air thickened, the way his footsteps seemed to echo longer than they should. The sensation of being watched from nowhere. He followed the path until it curved sharply and stopped in front of a tall, crumbling building, an old orphanage. Its name was barely legible on the rusted sign above the door, Marrow Hollow Home, but something in him stirred at the sight. He didn't remember it, not clearly, but something deeper than memory, something buried in his bones, told him he had been here. Inside, the air was heavy with dust and decay. The walls were lined with portraits, dozens of them, all children. Some were smiling faintly, others stared forward with hollow expressions, but one of them stopped him cold. A girl, barely 4 or 5, with hair the same length as Mira's. She wasn't labeled, but her eyes, they were the same. He reached up to touch the frame, and the moment his fingers brushed the glass, the air around him seemed to sigh. That night, back at home, Mira handed him another drawing without looking up. This one showed the same hallway, but now the door at the end was fully open. Inside, darkness bled out like ink. At the bottom of the page, in that same looping script, were 5 words, "You've been there before, Daddy." Callan didn't sleep that night. Not really. He drifted in and out of waking, his mind unraveling somewhere between memory and imagination. Every time he closed his eyes, he was back in that hallway. Not in the drawing, not looking at it, but inside it. The air was thick and unmoving, the walls seemed too narrow, and the door at the end always ajar, always bleeding light that wasn't quite light, called to him like a whisper beneath a closed mouth. He never reached it. Something always pulled him back. A jolt, a creak of the bed, Mira murmuring in her sleep. But the dream waited, patient and unchanged. By morning, the drawing on his nightstand had changed. He hadn't moved it. Mira hadn't been in the room, yet it was different now. The hallway stretched longer, warped slightly, as though it had grown overnight. The shadows of the people were still there, but now they had turned. They were facing him, all of them. Watching, and one was missing, the one that had been him, gone without a trace. He took the drawing to work, needing to feel some kind of normalcy, to re-anchor himself in the routine. But the moment he stepped into his office, something felt off. The windows were a little too dim, the ticking of the wall clock too slow. His desk, normally cluttered with files and folders, looked staged, like a memory someone else had reconstructed. Then, as he turned to hang his coat, he froze. There, pinned to the bulletin board, was a photograph. One he had never seen before. It showed a group of children standing outside a brick building. His eyes locked on one of them, a boy near the center, maybe 6 years old. Dull brown hair, tired eyes, a quiet slump to his shoulders. Something deep inside Callan buckled. It was him. Not maybe, not probably. It was him. Younger than any photo he remembered, but unmistakable. And behind the children, half in shadow, stood the orphanage he had found the day before. Marrow Hollow, he called his mother. She had raised him alone, and though their relationship had faded in recent years, she still answered with the same warmth. He didn't explain what he had found. He simply asked, "Was I ever adopted?" There was a pause longer than a pause should be, and then she said softly, "You were very young, Callan. We didn't think it would matter anymore." His hands tightened on the phone. From where? A sigh, then, somewhere upstate, a place that shut down. It wasn't a good place. You didn't talk for a long time after. When he hung up, his skin felt paper, thin. Mira's drawings weren't visions of the future. They weren't predictions. They were reminders. That night, Mira brought him another drawing. This one showed the outside of their apartment, but everything was wrong. The sky above it was the wrong color, deep green, almost sickly. The windows were all blacked out, except one, his, and inside that window was a figure with no face, only eyes. Dozens of them, watching in every direction. He didn't ask her what it meant. He didn't need to. Some things don't have to be remembered to be real. Some things wait, patient and hidden, until the right child draws them again. The next drawing came at 3 o'clock in the morning. Callan had fallen asleep on the couch, the television casting dim, colorless flickers across the room, when a soft shuffle of footsteps stirred him awake. Mira stood silently by his side, her small hand clutching a piece of paper, still warm from the pressure of crayon strokes. She didn't say a word. She never did when it was one of those drawings. He took it gently, bracing for another vision of familiar places distorted through unseen memory. But this time it was somewhere he didn't recognize, a town, small, old. The buildings slouched against each other like forgotten memories, their windows blackened as if they had seen too much and wanted no more. A cracked signpost leaned near the edge of the road, letters barely legible, "Welcome to Wenton's Hollow." He frowned. He'd never heard of it, but the road Mira had drawn, the jagged line snaking toward the town, was unmistakable. He had driven it a dozen times, a long stretch of rural highway just outside the city, and yet there was no town there. At least not one on any map. The next day, curiosity pulling harder than caution, Callan loaded Mira into the car. She didn't speak, didn't ask where they were going. She only stared out the window with that distant expression, like her thoughts were somewhere else entirely. The sky was a flat gray as they drove, not stormy, not calm, just muted, like the weather itself was holding its breath. 2 hours into the drive, the GPS flickered and died. Cell service vanished shortly after, and then, just as the highway curved near the base of the hills, they saw it. A narrow dirt path, almost hidden by overgrown brush, veered off to the right. There was no sign, no marking, but Mira stirred and pointed. Callan turned without question. The road narrowed, winding through dense trees that leaned inward as though whispering secrets to each other. The air grew thick, heavy with the scent of damp moss and something older. And then, like crossing an invisible barrier, the trees parted, and there it was. Wenton's Hollow, just as Mira had drawn it. It looked abandoned, windows boarded, doors half opened like gasping mouths. But there were signs of life, faint trails in the dust, a porch swing still creaking in the breeze, though there was no breeze at all. Callan parked the car, hands trembling as he stepped out. Mira followed, her eyes wide but calm, as if this were all familiar. They walked past shuttered shops and crooked lampposts. A schoolhouse leaned against time itself, its bell rusted in place. And then they came to a courtyard. In the center stood a statue, tall, faceless, its arms extended in welcome or warning. Beneath it, etched in stone, what has been forgotten will return, what was drawn will walk again. Mira reached for his hand. He looked down, and for the first time she spoke. "This is where I lived before." The words hit him like a wave, the kind that doesn't crash, but pulls. Pulls everything you thought you knew away from you. He looked around, trying to hold onto something solid, but the town seemed to shimmer at the edges, as if it had only barely agreed to exist. Some places aren't lost, they're just waiting for someone to remember them. The schoolhouse was smaller than it looked in Mira's drawing. Time had bowed its roof and shattered half the windows, though not from vandalism. These breaks were too clean, too purposeful, like something inside had tried to get out without making a sound. Callan hesitated at the foot of the stone steps, and Mira stood beside him, still holding his hand, her expression unreadable. The door groaned open with the gentlest push. Inside, the air was cold, not the natural chill of an abandoned place, but a deeper cold, one that hummed just beneath the skin, like a forgotten melody you don't realize you're hearing until it stops. Dust lay thick on the floorboards, but their footsteps left no trail, as if the dust refused to acknowledge them. Chalk still clung to the boards, faint equations and half-written sentences preserved as though class had been dismissed only moments before. Rows of tiny desks sat undisturbed, facing a teacher's podium that leaned sideways like a weary figure. And above that podium, pinned like a relic, was another drawing, one of Mira's, but it was old, faded. The crayon lines dull with time, the paper slightly curled at the edges. The image was unmistakable. The schoolhouse itself, surrounded by children with no faces, holding hands in a perfect circle. Callan felt the air shift. A whisper passed behind him, no words, just the suggestion of one. Mira walked toward the drawing slowly, her fingers brushing the edge of it like greeting an old friend. "They made me draw it," she said softly. Her voice echoed too long in the room, like the walls were reluctant to let it go. "Who did?" Callan asked, but she didn't respond. Instead, she turned to the nearest desk, opening the lid. Inside were dozens more drawings, folded and tucked away like secrets. One by one, Callan unfolded them. Each one showed something, real places he knew, events that had already happened. The train derailment 2 years ago, a fire at a theater across town, even his own face, standing in front of the very schoolhouse they now stood in, with Mira by his side. "They're not just drawings," Mira whispered, "they're warnings." Callan looked back at the board, the faceless children. The circle, the schoolhouse. Then he noticed something else. In the background of that picture, nearly hidden behind one of the trees, was another figure. A tall shape with no features, sketched in faint black. Not crayon, not pencil, something darker. Mira looked up at him. "It watches when I draw. That's how it knows what happens next." A sudden creak echoed from the hallway. Not from their footsteps. A desk far in the back slowly rocked forward, as if nudged. They both turned. Nothing, but the cold grew heavier, and beneath it, the faint sound of children humming. They left without another word. Outside, the sky had dimmed, but not toward sunset. It had dulled, grayed, like something had peeled back the layer of time that kept day and night separate. Wenton's Hollow felt different now, as if it had noticed them. They left the schoolhouse in silence, Mira's small hand wrapped tightly around Callan's. The clouds had thickened above them, muting the sunlight into a strange gray glow that didn't seem to come from any direction at all. Trees leaned just slightly in the windless air, as though eavesdropping. Even the birds had stopped their calls. Callan took the road leading south back toward the highway, toward something familiar. But after a mile, the road curved in a way it hadn't before. A gentle, spiraling turn that should have ended at the gas station on the outskirts, yet opened instead onto the northern edge of Wenton's Hollow. They both stopped, the same broken street lamp tilted on the corner, the same row of houses half, sunken from time and rain. Callan looked at the cracked sign welcoming them to town, now standing in front of them again. A crow perched on top, head cocked, watching without sound. "We just came this way," he muttered, checking the map on his phone, but the GPS pin spun slowly, unable to find their location. The roads were there, but grayed out like the system couldn't quite decide if the town existed. "I think it knows," Mira said quietly, eyes fixed on the crow. "When you try to leave, it folds the road behind you, so you walk in circles without realizing." Callan's stomach sank. "What does—" She didn't answer, only tugged at his hand and pointed forward. That house wasn't there before. At the edge of the road stood a narrow, two-story home that hadn't been there the first time they passed. White siding, green shutters, porch swing swaying gently. No wind, no sound, just that slow, deliberate movement. Callan stepped closer, drawn in by something he couldn't name. There was something comforting about it at first. Warm light in the windows, the smell of old wood and faint cinnamon in the air. But then he saw them. Drawings taped to every window from inside, dozens of them, all done in crayon. All in Mira's style. He walked up the porch steps. Each creak felt distant, muffled, like the sound had to travel through water to reach his ears. He opened the front door. Inside was a hallway that stretched far too long for the size of the house. At the end, a red door stood closed, and above it, freshly scrawled across the ceiling, were words in a child's handwriting. "Draw it and it will happen." Behind him, Mira didn't enter. She stared up at the house like it was something alive. "This isn't part of the town," she said. "This is where it watches from." Callan turned back to the hallway, but the door was open now. A soft red light poured from within. No footsteps, no sound, but something had changed. The air grew heavier. "Don't go in," Mira said. "It's not finished with us yet." They backed away together, the porch groaning under each step. The swing still moved gently behind them. When they stepped off the porch, Callan looked back, and the house was gone. Just an empty lot, overgrown with weeds. But when he turned on his phone again, the gallery was open. A new image had been added, one he hadn't taken. It showed the hallway of that house, the red door, and a shadow just behind it, leaning into the frame. He turned the phone off. "I don't think we're meant to leave yet," Mira whispered. They slept that night in a boarded-up library near the edge of Wenton's Hollow, one that didn't appear on any records Callan could find. Not online, not in the town registry, not even on local map. From decades ago. But the shelves were there, dusty and untouched, filled with books whose pages felt soft and too warm, as though recently read by invisible hands. Mira curled up beneath a faded tapestry that hung near the children's section. Callan sat beside her, flipping through a tattered book of symbols and folk legends. The pages described places that shift when watched, doorways that appear only once, and children who carry future dreams inside their minds like locked music boxes. He paused on a page that described a phenomenon called the sketching. According to the book, some children are born with the ability to draw not what is, but what will be, unwilling conduits to a memory of the future. The text warned of a parasite of place towns and locations that feed on such abilities, reshaping reality around the gifted child to keep them from escaping. As he read, Mira stirred. "I dreamed of the woman again," she whispered, eyes still closed. But she had no face this time, just a blank space where it should be. She kept pointing at something, not at me, but behind me. Callan glanced toward the hallway at the back of the library. No wind, no creaks, but the silence felt too dense, as though muffling something deeper, after sunrise, or what passed for it under the unchanging gray. Mira led him through the town square. She no longer walked with hesitation. It was as if the town was revealing itself to her in layers, and she could see just slightly further than anyone else. They stopped at a playground that wasn't there the day before. The rusted merry-go round spun slowly, though the air was perfectly still. Hanging from its bars were more drawings, clipped with twine and small metal pins. Callan pulled one free. It showed the two of them standing in front of a building that had been burned down years ago. The old train depot, reduced to ruins after a lightning strike. Yet in the drawing it looked restored, whole again, a light glowing from its highest window. "We need to go there," Mira said quietly. "It's next." It took nearly an hour to reach the depot, or where it should have been. What they found instead was something impossible. A building that was both burnt and unburnt. One side was charred, collapsed beams and soot, blackened bricks, but the other, its twin, stood pristine as though untouched by fire. And right in the middle, bridging the two halves, was a narrow hallway that flickered like an old film reel, as if reality hadn't decided which version should exist. They stepped inside together. In the center of the room sat a desk, and on it, a fresh stack of paper. Crayons scattered beside it. Mira approached slowly, and without a word, picked up the green crayon. She drew a door, then a key, then a name Callan didn't recognize, but the moment it was written, something shifted. The sound of a train horn echoed from far away, not from the past, not from memory, from now, and through the flickering hallway, they saw it coming. The train that shouldn't exist anymore, the one Mira had drawn. The train emerged from the mist like a ghost, its outline sharp and clear against the dim horizon. It wasn't like the trains Callan had seen before, not the rusted relics of forgotten years, but something newly constructed, its metal gleaming beneath the ethereal light. The whistle, a long, mournful note, echoed through the air, but there were no tracks beneath it, no foundation supporting its weight. Mira stood at the edge of the platform, her gaze fixed on the train. "It's waiting for us," she murmured, her voice barely audible beneath the low hum of the machine. The train seemed to know they were there, its presence beckoning them closer with an almost tangible pull. Callan, despite the chill creeping up his spine, stepped forward. The closer they got, the more unreal the train appeared. The windows, dark and glassy, reflected not the town around them, but scenes from elsewhere, places Callan couldn't recognize. A forest of silver trees, a vast desert under a blood-red sky, a city that seemed to float in a sea of fog. "Get on," Mira said, her hand outstretched toward the door. There was no hesitation in her voice, no uncertainty. She was certain, as if she had done this 1,000 times before, though Callan knew she had never seen the train until that very moment. He followed her into the car, the interior dim and quiet. The wood, paneled seats were empty, save for one, a single vacant chair facing the door. The air smelled faintly of stale paper and soot, as if the train had been sealed for years, yet untouched. As they settled into their seats, the train lurched forward, though the motion was too smooth to be natural. The world outside blurred into an abstract smear of colors, twisting into patterns that shouldn't have been possible. Callan looked out the window, watching the scenery distort. "We're not going anywhere," he said, his voice low. "Look outside, the world isn't moving." But Mira was staring straight ahead, her eyes locked onto the door. "We're not meant to go forward," she replied softly, We're here to find what we've forgotten." A cold wave of unease washed over Callan. He glanced around again, searching for anything that made sense. But the train was empty, as if the world had been swallowed up by its passage, leaving nothing but a hollow, timeless space. Then, through the thin crack of the door, Callan saw something, or rather, someone, a figure, standing just outside. They wore a dark coat, the collar pulled high to obscure their face. A slight breeze made the coat shift, but no sound reached him, no whisper of wind. The figure was a shadow of something else, something that wasn't meant to exist. "Who is that?" Callan asked, his voice hoarse. Mira's gaze never wavered. "It's you, but not the you remember." The words didn't sink in at first, and Callan stood, heart hammering, as he moved toward the door. His hand grasped the handle, but the moment he touched it, the world inside the train began to dissolve. The walls flickered like broken glass, the seats and floor warping in impossible angles, but the figure remained. And its eyes, those eyes, dark and empty, watched him as though it knew everything he had ever done, every decision he had ever made. Suddenly, the door opened, not to the outside, but to something darker, a blackness that seemed to stretch beyond comprehension. From the void, a whisper broke the silence, a voice, familiar but distant, like the echoes of a long, forgotten dream. "Come closer." The figure stepped into the doorway, its face now visible, but it wasn't Callan. It wasn't anyone he knew. The face was blurred, shifting, like a reflection in water disturbed by an unseen hand. But one thing was certain, it was calling him. Behind him, Mira stood, still calm, her hand resting lightly on the seat. She didn't need to speak, her gaze was enough. "It's your choice now," she said. Callan hesitated, his breath shallow. The train continued its journey through the darkened nothingness, but he couldn't shake the feeling that there was no destination, no end to the tracks. He looked at the figure again, and for the first time he knew. Whatever he chose, it would change everything. The train continued its steady journey through the thick, impenetrable fog, yet its movement seemed more like the slow, inevitable drift of time itself. The landscape outside remained a blur, shifting in ways that defied logic. Colors swirled together, forming shapes that shouldn't have been possible. One moment, the view seemed to stretch into an endless ocean. The next, it became a vast stretch of dark sky, dotted with strange, glowing stars. Inside the train, the atmosphere was heavy, as though the air itself carried a weight of forgotten memories. Callan could feel it pressing against him, something ancient, something buried deep within the train itself. The walls groaned under the strain, like the groan of an old house settling into the earth. The world outside remained unchanged, yet the stillness inside was suffocating. Mira sat silently beside him, her eyes fixed on the space in front of them, her hands folded neatly in her lap. She hadn't spoken since they boarded, and Callan found that unsettling. She had always been the one to guide him, to give him answers when he needed them, but now she seemed lost in her own thoughts. Or perhaps she was simply waiting for him to come to his own understanding. "Where are we going?" Callan finally asked, his voice breaking the silence like a stone dropping into still water. His heart was beating faster now, a growing unease clawing at his chest. This train, it's not real, none of this feels real. Mira's eyes flickered to him, but she didn't speak. Instead, she looked out the window at the ever-changing landscape, her expression distant, almost sad. "You know where we're going," she replied softly, her voice carrying a strange, knowing weight. "You've known all along." Callan looked at her, confused. He didn't understand. There was something about the way she spoke, something that made the hairs on the back of his neck stand on end. It was as though she wasn't talking about the train or the journey, but something far more personal, something that was tied to him, something he couldn't yet grasp. The figure outside the train door appeared again, standing in the same position, unmoving. Callan's pulse quickened. The figure's face was still a shifting blur, but its presence was undeniable, a weight pressing against him from the outside. It seemed to be waiting for something or someone. Mira turned to face him fully now, her gaze sharp, as though seeing him for the first time. "You have to decide," she said, her voice firm though still quiet. "The past, the future. They're both within your reach, but you can only have one." Callan blinked, his mind racing. "What do you mean? I don't understand." "The future is in the drawing," Mira said slowly, her words precise and heavy with meaning. "But it's not just about what's drawn. It's about what's already been. The child's drawings, they aren't just visions. They're memories. The future, the past. It's all one." The train's whistle blew again, its mournful cry reverberating through the air like a warning. The figure outside seemed to move now, stepping forward, its blurry form becoming a little clearer with each passing second. Callan stood up, his legs unsteady as he made his way to the door. He reached for the handle, but stopped just short, his breath caught in his throat. "I don't know if I'm ready," he whispered, almost to himself. The figure was right there, so close now. It was as if it had been waiting for him to make this choice, to step into the unknown, to embrace whatever it was that lay beyond the train's door. Mira's voice broke through his thoughts. "It's already chosen you, Callan," she said, her tone soft but resolute. "The child's drawings have always been a part of you. The path you're on, there's no turning back." Callan turned to her, his heart pounding in his chest. He wanted to argue, to demand answers, but deep down, he knew she was right. The train, the fog, the figure, it was all connected, all leading him to this moment. With a deep breath, he grasped the handle and pulled the door open. The blackness beyond swallowed the light, and in that moment, Callan understood. There was no escaping it now. The moment Callan stepped beyond the threshold of the train, he was swallowed by an oppressive silence. The door slammed shut behind him with a metallic clank, sealing him off from the world he had known. Before him stretched an endless expanse of fog, its thickness so heavy that it felt almost tangible, like a thick, suffocating blanket that clung to his skin and choked the air from his lungs. He stood at the edge of a narrow path, winding through the fog as far as the eye could see. Each step he took echoed in the emptiness, the sound muffled, as though the very ground was absorbing him. The distant shapes of trees loomed like silent witnesses, their twisted branches reaching into the sky as if pleading for release. The landscape was familiar, but distorted, like a dream warped by time and memory. The child was ahead of him, her small form barely visible in the distance. She moved slowly, deliberately, her hands clasped tightly around something. Callan's heart began to race as he tried to close the distance between them. But every step he took felt as though he was moving through molasses. The fog grew thicker, its grip tightening, and the path before him seemed to shift with every passing second, as though the world itself was rearranging its pieces. He called out to her, but his voice was swallowed by the fog, absorbed by the thick, oppressive silence. The child didn't turn around. She continued walking, her pace unhurried, as though she were waiting for him to catch up. Then, as he took another step forward, the first drawing appeared. It was projected in the air before him, as if the fog itself had solidified into paper, the ink curling into shapes and lines. The image was hauntingly familiar, his own face, staring back at him from the paper, but with eyes that seemed to look through him, eyes that didn't belong to him. The drawing flickered, then shifted, revealing another scene, a street, lined with empty houses, their windows staring like empty eyes. Callan stopped dead in his tracks. This wasn't just a drawing, it was more than that. It was a memory, a vision of something that had yet to happen, or perhaps something that had already passed. The chill of recognition swept through him like an electric shock, his body trembling. The images shifted once more, now showing a figure standing in the middle of the street. It was the same figure he had seen earlier, the one outside the train, but this time the figure was not a blurry shadow. It had form, it had shape, it had a face. The fog swirled, and the figure stepped forward, its eyes locking with his. A feeling of dread settled over Callan's chest, a cold, suffocating weight that pressed him deeper into the fog. The ink of the drawing bled out, staining the air, and the figure's lips moved, though no sound emerged. Yet somehow, Callan could hear it, his name, spoken in a voice that didn't belong to anyone. "Callan, you've been drawn into this." The voice reverberated through him, through every inch of his body. It wasn't a voice he recognized, but it was one he had been waiting to hear. The truth, long buried, was beginning to surface. He took a step backward, the weight of his feet dragging through the ground as if the earth itself were trying to hold him in place. The child's figure continued ahead, unwavering, and the path before him split into two. One path stretched further into the fog, disappearing into the unknown. The other led toward the drawing, toward the shadowy figure waiting in the distance. Callan knew what he had to do, but the decision was a heavy one. The path to the future, if that's what this was clear. The drawings had always been leading him here. They were a map of things to come, a map that had already been drawn, a map that he couldn't change. But the other path, the one that led toward the figure, was different. It was a path back, a chance to understand the truth of the past, to uncover the mystery of who or what the child truly was, and why their drawings were the key to everything. The child stopped walking, her back still to him, her head tilted slightly, as though waiting for him to make his choice. The air was thick with the weight of her silence, and Callan could feel his pulse quicken. The moment had arrived, and no matter which way he chose, he knew he would never return to the life he had known. The path before Callan split once more, the fog swirling around him like a living, breathing entity. It seemed to press in on him from all sides, as if the world itself were closing in, waiting for him to make a choice. He glanced toward the child, who stood still in the mist, her small figure outlined faintly by the soft, ethereal light that seemed to emanate from nowhere. Her back was still turned to him, but he could feel her presence, the quiet weight of her being, as though she were a part of the very fog itself. The air around him felt heavier now, charged with something unspoken. There was no mistaking the connection between the child and the shifting landscape, no denying that her presence here was not by chance. She was the key, the one who held the power to unlock everything. Callan's thoughts raced as he considered the paths before him. One path led deeper into the fog, into the unknown, where the future lay in wait, where everything had already been written, where the child's drawings had always guided him. The other path, though it seemed darker, seemed to call to him with the promise of answers, a chance to understand the child's strange gift, to uncover the figure that had stalked him from the beginning. His gaze shifted once again to the child. Her hands, still clenched around something, trembled slightly in the fog. The air thickened with the weight of her unspoken words, the silence almost deafening. The ink of the drawings, still lingering in the air, seemed to pulse with a life of its own, the lines and shapes bending, twisting in ways that defied logic. He took a step forward, the ground beneath his feet feeling unsteady, as though the earth itself were shifting beneath him. The fog parted slightly, just enough to reveal something. A figure, standing in the distance, half shrouded in mist. It was tall, its form cloaked in shadow, its face hidden beneath a dark hood. It was the same figure he had seen in the drawings, the one whose eyes had never left him. The figure stepped forward, its movements smooth and deliberate. It spoke, its voice echoing in Callan's mind, even though its lips never moved. "Do you think you have a choice, Callan?" The words felt like a slap to the face, cold and sharp. His breath caught in his throat as a wave of realization crashed over him. This was no ordinary figure. This was the source of the drawings, the one who had been guiding him all along, the one whose fate was intertwined with his own. "You've always been part of this." The figure continued, its voice like a soft whisper in his ear. "From the moment you stepped onto the train, you've been drawn into the ink of fate." Callan's heart raced, his mind spinning with the enormity of the truth. He had never truly had control. The choices he had made, the paths he had taken, They were all part of a design, a plan that had been set in motion long before he had even realized. And the child, with her drawings, was the one who had been guiding him toward this moment. Why me? Callan's voice cracked as the words left his mouth. He didn't want to ask, but he had to know. He had to understand why he was the one chosen for this, why he had been pulled into this web of fate. The figure tilted its head, its face still hidden beneath the cloak. Because you are the one who can see the future. You are the one who can understand the child's drawings, the one who can follow the ink to its end. The child turned toward him then, her face still hidden in the shadows, but her eyes were full of an ancient knowing, a depth of understanding that Callan could never hope to match. She raised one small hand, and the drawing appeared in the air once again, this time with a new twist. The ink shifted and transformed, revealing a scene he had not seen before. It was a street, but not one he recognized, twisting, broken, abandoned. And at the end of the street, standing alone in the darkness, was the figure, its face now clear, now unmistakable. It was him. Callan stumbled backward, his pulse quickening as the realization sank in. The figure was him. The person who had been pulling the strings, drawing the path, was his future self trapped in the ink of fate, unable to escape the design that had already been set. The fog seemed to close in tighter, pressing against him, suffocating him with the weight of this new truth. He was not just a part of the story, he was the story. The child's drawings, the figure in the shadows, the twisting paths. They had all led him here, to this moment, to this realization. And now, there was no turning back. The fog seemed to pulse with a rhythm now, as though it were breathing alongside Callan. His chest tightened, and the weight of what he had just discovered, the unshakable truth that he was both the one seeking and the one being sought, pressed down on him like a great stone. He could feel the shift in the air, the way the landscape was responding to his every movement, every thought. It was as if the world itself was reacting to the revelation of his role in this twisted fate. The child stood motionless, her small hands still clutching the crumpled paper, her eyes dark pools that seemed to pull at his very soul. She did not speak, but there was something in her gaze, a depth of knowledge far beyond her years, that seemed to speak volumes. As Callan looked at her, he realized that she was not merely a guide. She was a witness, an innocent bystander to a tragedy that had already been set in motion. The figure in the shadows, his future self, loomed like a distant storm, threatening to consume him. Every step forward seemed to draw him closer to the inevitable, to the truth that he had always been a part of this, that his choices had never been his own. He had been walking in circles, a puppet caught in the strands of his own destiny, manipulated by the lines the child drew. You can't change it. The figure's voice echoed through the fog, cold and unyielding. It's already been drawn. The words struck him like a slap, and Callan felt his knees go weak. How could he possibly fight against something so deeply rooted, so ingrained into the very fabric of the world around him? The child had drawn everything, every step, every choice, and now he was trapped in the web of ink, unable to escape the pull of his own future. But then, a flicker of thought sparked in the back of his mind. What if I can change the drawing? The idea was absurd, yet somehow it resonated with a part of him that had not yet given up. He glanced down at the child, whose gaze had never wavered. She was waiting for something, though what, he couldn't be sure. Was it hope, or perhaps it was simply the expectation that he would play his part, that he would continue down the path the drawings had laid out for him? He took a step toward her, and for the first time she lifted her hand and extended it toward him. Her small fingers were trembling, as though she, too, understood the gravity of the situation. Callan reached out, his own hand shaking as he drew closer. The moment their fingers touched, a surge of energy rippled through him, and the world seemed to twist. The fog thickened, becoming almost solid, pressing in around him. He could feel the ink, the child's ink, coursing through the air, drawing shapes and symbols that danced before his eyes. But this time it was different. This time He wasn't just a passive observer. He could feel the lines, the pathways, the way the world bent under the weight of the child's drawings. A sharp pain shot through his chest, and he gasped for breath. The ink was no longer just ink. It was alive. It had a pulse, a heartbeat, and it was trying to claim him, to pull him into its web. But Callan resisted. He focused, drawing on every ounce of strength he had left. His hand, still holding the child's, began to tremble, and he could feel the energy within him. His will, his defiance pushing against the ink's pull. The drawings began to shift, the lines bending and warping as they tried to fight him. The child's face, still shrouded in shadows, remained calm, but Callan saw something flicker in her eyes. A glimmer of something like hope. What if I can rewrite the line? The thought surged through him like a wave, and for the first time, he felt a sense of control. He reached into the fog, his fingers grazing the air, and as he did, the ink around them rippled, changing course. The child's hand tightened in his, her fingers now gripping him with an intensity that sent a chill down his spine. It was as if she, too, understood what was happening, what they were doing together. The world around them flickered again, and this time the fog parted, revealing the broken path ahead. The streets, twisted and abandoned, no longer felt like they were part of the same dream. They were real now, raw and unfinished, full of potential. The ink lines that had once defined his path began to fray, unraveling at the edges, the weight of fate slipping from his shoulders. "You can change it." The figure's voice was softer now, a whisper lost in the fog. "But remember, Callan, once you start drawing your own future, there's no going back." The child's eyes met his, and for the first time she smiled. A small, sad smile, but a smile nonetheless. It wasn't the smile of someone trapped by fate. It was the smile of someone who had given everything to free the one who had once been them. Callan took a deep breath and, for the first time, felt the ink of destiny slip from his grasp. The lines were his to draw now. The moment the fog parted, and the path ahead twisted beneath Callan's feet, the weight of his decision hit him like a crash of thunder. The ink, those once predictable lines that had shaped his every move, flickered like dying embers, losing their strength in the wake of his defiance. But as the fog thinned and the air cleared, a new kind of heaviness settled in. The lines he had erased were not gone. They had simply been replaced by something else. He could feel it now, this strange, sharp feeling in his chest, as though the very air was thinner, stretched taut with tension. The world felt unsteady, like a tablecloth being tugged out from under a delicate set of dishes. His every breath now seemed to echo with the consequences of his action, the sense that he had set something in motion that was beyond his understanding. The child beside him had not moved. Her hand, still grasping his, seemed to anchor him to this strange new reality, though Callan was unsure whether it was her touch or his own resolve that kept him grounded. Her face, still obscured by shadow, was as calm as it had always been, but something in the way she held herself now was different. It was as if she knew more than she had let on, and the more Callan thought about it, the more he realized that this was true. The child had been more than a guide. She had been a witness, but also a force that had been shaping him all along. The world around them had shifted again, the buildings now towering impossibly high, and the streets empty, silent as though abandoned. No cars, no people, only the distant echoes of a past long gone. Callan's heart raced as he tried to make sense of this new place. He had stepped outside the lines, but had he simply created a new web, one even more intricate and inescapable than the last? The child tugged at his sleeve, and without thinking, he followed her. She led him toward the end of the street, her small feet moving with an unnatural speed, though she never once looked back. The air grew heavier with each step, the silence pressing in, suffocating in its intensity. Then, without warning, she stopped. Ahead, through the shifting fog, Callan could see a figure standing still at the crossroads. The figure was tall, cloaked in shadow, its features indistinct. Callan's heart skipped a beat. He knew that figure, knew it like he knew his own name. It was his future self, standing at the crossroads, waiting. The child didn't speak. She only reached up and placed her small hand against the corner of a nearby building. There, on the smooth surface of the wall, the ink began to move. It swirled, forming shapes, symbols that Callan couldn't quite understand, but felt the weight of nonetheless. The lines bled into one another, becoming a web of interconnected paths that seemed to stretch out into infinity. The figure at the crossroads did not move, but Callan could feel its eyes on him, waiting. It was like standing before a mirror that reflected not just his image, but his every possibility, every choice yet to be made. The figure's stillness was unnerving, as if it had already seen everything that would come to pass, as if it were already beyond the point of change. A voice, cold and distant, reverberated in the air. It was his own voice. Once you draw your future, there is no undoing it. There is no return. You've seen the paths, but you haven't seen what lies at their end. Callan's chest tightened, and he turned to the child beside him, her hand now slipping from his own. She stepped away, moving toward the crossroads. The shadows seemed to cling to her, twisting as she moved. Her small form seemed to dissolve into the darkness. With a final glance over her shoulder, she whispered, "The line is not always straight, but it is always yours to draw." And with that, she vanished. Callan was alone again, the crossroads ahead now the only thing left in this strange, fractured world. His heart thudded painfully in his chest, and the figure, his future self, began to move toward him, each step slow, deliberate. The closer it came, the more Callan could feel the weight of everything that was to come. The future was not some distant thing. It was now, it was him, and it was already drawing him in. The air crackled with the tension of what was to come. The ink, the child, the paths, it was all leading him here, to this moment, and Callan knew that the choice was his. But as the figure came closer, he could see the lines of his own future stretching out ahead of him, each one jagged and broken, each one marked by decisions he had yet to make. "Are you ready to see it?" The figure's voice was low, but it seemed to echo in the depths of Callan's mind. Callan took a deep breath, and the air seemed to still around him. He had erased the lines, he had broken the path, but now he had to draw something new, and what he chose would define everything that was yet to come, the end.